Have you ever walked into your garden in the quiet hours of early June, when the air is still soft, the leaves are full of life, and everything seems to breathe with peace? That is the moment many gardeners treasure most. The soil is still cool, the plants are standing tall, and every bed feels like a promise taking shape. Because a garden is never just a place where we grow food, it is where we plant hope. Every seedling we press into the spring soil carries a small agreement with the future. We give it water, care, patience, and protection. In return, we hope it will give us shade, flowers, fruit, and something deeper, a reminder that life can still rise from the earth. But as the season turns, that promise begins to face its hardest test. Right now, a silent force is moving across gardens, farms, backyards, and raised beds. Heat is arriving faster than many gardeners expect. In parts of Europe, temperatures have climbed above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. In the UK, records are being pushed beyond what many growers once thought normal. Across North America, powerful heat domes are settling over the land, trapping hot air above the soil and driving temperatures into dangerous, triple-digit territory. We call it a heat wave. But to the living soil beneath our feet, to the fine roots searching for moisture, and to the leaves trying to keep themselves upright, it is more than hot weather. It is a survival crisis. When the air reaches 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher for 3 straight days, a vegetable garden begins to cross a critical threshold. Plants that looked strong yesterday can suddenly wilt, stall, or drop flowers. And when temperatures rise to 95 degrees Fahrenheit or more, for 5 days or longer, the risk becomes far more serious. Damaged cells, failing water movement inside the plant, burned roots, and even total crop loss. So the question is not only how we save the garden. The deeper question is why we garden in the first place. Is it only for tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, and herbs? Or is it also to learn how living things endure pressure, adapt to hardship, and recover after the heat has passed? Today, we are not going to panic. We are going to prepare. Before the heat wave arrives, we will walk through 10 practical, preventative steps that protect the soil, strengthen the plants, and give your garden the best chance to survive. And as we protect this green sanctuary, we may also learn something about our own resilience. Section 1. Primary Hydration Architecture. Water the soil, not the leaves. The heat is coming, and for many gardeners, the first instinct is to run outside with a hose and spray water over everything that looks tired. I understand that feeling. When leaves droop and the sun feels unforgiving, we want to help immediately. But one thing I have learned after years of working with gardens, farms, soil, and stressed plants is this. The wrong watering habit can hurt your garden almost as much as the heat itself. Your first defense is not random watering. It is a strong hydration system built around the soil, not the leaves. During extreme heat, we need to move away from light, daily sprinkling based only on the calendar. When you give your plants a little water every afternoon, most of that moisture stays in the top few inches of soil. Over time, the plant learns to keep its roots shallow because that is where the water is. It may look fine for a while, but when a heat dome arrives and the surface soil bakes into a dry, hard, water-repelling crust, those shallow roots suffer first. They heat up, dry out, and suddenly the whole plant becomes completely dependent on you just to stay alive. Instead, water deeply and water early. The best window is usually between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. before the sun becomes intense. At that time, humidity is higher, winds are calmer, and temperatures are lower, so far less water is lost to evaporation compared to watering in the middle of the day. More importantly, early deep watering gives the plant time to fully hydrate and build internal turgor pressure, which is what keeps leaves firm, upright, and better prepared to face hours of heat. The goal is to soak the soil down to about 6 to 8 inches. That depth matters. When water reaches deeper layers, roots are encouraged to grow downward into cooler, more stable soil where moisture lasts longer. A deeper root system is a stronger survival system. A simple way to check your watering is to place an empty tuna can or shallow container in the garden bed while you irrigate. When the container collects about 1 inch of water, you have delivered a proper deep watering cycle. For a standard 10 by 10 foot vegetable bed, that is roughly 8 to 9 gallons of water during peak heat conditions. So before the heat wave arrives, ask yourself honestly, have you been watering the leaves, Or have you been feeding the life of the plant where it truly begins? At the roots. Section 2. Pause the feasts. Stop fertilizing immediately. When we see a plant struggling in hot weather, our instinct is often to feed it. A tomato plant wilts, a pepper plant slows down, the leaves look tired, and we reach for fertilizer because we think nutrients will give the plant strength. It feels logical. When something is weak, we want to nourish it. But during severe heat, fertilizing can become one of the most dangerous mistakes in the garden. When temperatures rise above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, plants begin to shift into survival mode. Their metabolism changes. They slow active cell division, reduce transpiration, and limit photosynthesis so they can conserve internal energy, starches, and moisture. In simple terms, the plant is no longer trying to grow fast. It is trying to stay alive. If you apply fertilizer at that moment, especially a nitrogen-heavy fertilizer, you push the plant in the opposite direction. Nitrogen encourages fresh, tender, leafy growth. That new growth requires more water, more minerals, and more energy. But a heat-stressed plant already has a strained vascular system. It may not be able to move enough water to support that sudden flush of soft tissue. The result can be rapid wilting, vascular shock, and in serious cases, complete collapse. There is another problem many gardeners overlook. During a heat wave, water evaporates quickly from the soil. Any fertilizer salts that are not absorbed can become concentrated around the roots. When that salt level rises too high, it can pull water out of the root tissues instead of allowing roots to take water in. That is how fertilizer burn happens, and in hot, dry soil, it can be devastating. So during the heat wave, respect the plant's silence. Do not force it to grow when it is trying to conserve itself. Pause all fertilizing until the heat has fully passed. Once temperatures return to normal, give the soil 24 to 48 hours to stabilize with proper moisture. Then, if needed, you can apply a light, highly diluted organic nutrient blend to replace what may have been washed away through deep watering. Sometimes the best care is not more feeding, more pushing, or more stimulation. Sometimes the wisest thing we can do is let the plant rest and help it survive the heat. Section 3. Rebuild the thermal barrier. Water first, mulch second. If you have ever touched bare garden soil in the middle of a hot summer day, you know how harsh it can become. Exposed soil under direct sun can climb well above 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and at that point, we are not just talking about dry ground. We are talking about soil hot enough to damage fine root hairs, the tiny structures that absorb water and nutrients. That kind of heat also weakens the microbial life that keeps soil healthy and active. This is where organic mulch becomes one of the most important tools in the summer garden. A 2 to 4 inch layer of light-colored organic mulch works like insulation. It helps reduce soil surface temperature, protects the root zone, and slows evaporation so water remains where plants can actually use it. In a heat wave, mulch is not decoration, it is protection. But there is one rule you must follow: water first, mulch second. If you place fresh mulch over bone-dry soil, you are simply covering dryness and trapping it underneath. Later, when you water lightly, or when a small rain comes through, that moisture may not penetrate properly. The top looks protected, but the root zone remains thirsty. Before you mulch, deeply soak the soil profile. Then cover it. This locks in moisture and creates a cooler, more stable environment around the roots. For vegetable gardens, clean, light-colored straw is one of the best choices. It breathes well, reflects some sunlight away from the soil, and slowly breaks down into organic matter. Shredded leaves, finished compost, and dried grass clippings can also work, as long as they are used properly. Grass clippings should be applied in thin layers so they do not mat together and block air or water. But be careful with what many gardeners call volcano mulching. Never pile mulch tightly against soft plant stems, tree trunks, or shrub bases. When mulch is packed against the stem, it creates a damp, dark collar that can suffocate tissue, reduce air exchange, and invite fungal rot or pests. Keep a clear gap of about 1 to 2 inches around soft vegetable stems and about 3 to 6 inches around woody shrubs and trees. A blanket can protect us in winter, but in the garden, mulch protects roots from summer heat. Before the worst temperatures arrive, make sure your soil is watered deeply, then cover it wisely. That simple order, water first, mulch second, can make the difference between a plant that merely survives and a plant that recovers with strength. Section 4. Erect the shield. Deploy knitted shade cloth. Many temperate and cool season crops were never meant to stand unprotected under the brutal glare of a midday sun during a heat dome. Lettuce, spinach, young brassicas, tender herbs, and even some fruiting plants can only handle so much light and heat before their tissues begin to suffer. When light intensity rises beyond what the plant can safely process, it can lead to photooxidative damage. In simple terms, the plant receives more solar energy than it can use, and that excess energy starts damaging the very systems that keep it alive. High heat combined with intense UVB radiation can degrade chlorophyll, weaken cell membranes, and leave pale white or yellow patches on leaves and developing fruits. Many gardeners know this damage as sun scald, and once it appears, those affected tissues do not truly recover. So before the heat reaches its worst point, we need to bring shade to the plants. One of the most useful tools for this is 30% to 50% knitted polyethylene shade cloth. That range gives protection without blocking too much light. It filters the harshest infrared and ultraviolet rays, helps lower canopy temperature by about 10 degrees Fahrenheit to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and keeps transpiration more stable. That means the plant can lose water at a slower, safer rate, instead of being pushed into leaf scorch and dehydration. But shade only works well when it is installed correctly. Do not lay shade cloth directly on top of the foliage. Suspend it about 12 to 18 inches above the plant canopy, using hoops, stakes, or a simple frame. Keep the sides open so air can move freely through the space. That air gap is extremely important. If you drape bed sheets, row covers, or shade material directly onto leaves, you can trap hot, damp, stagnant air underneath. Instead of protecting the plant, you may create a small greenhouse effect that cooks the foliage and encourages mold or disease. The goal is not to seal the plant in. The goal is to soften the sun while still allowing ventilation. If you do not have commercial shade cloth, do not panic. Light-colored cotton sheets, thin curtains, or old window screens can still help in an emergency. Focus on blocking the harsh afternoon sun, especially from the south and west, because that is where the most damaging heat usually comes from. When the heat becomes too intense, plants need a temporary canopy just like people do. A little shade at the right time can prevent burned leaves, protect young fruits, and give the whole garden a better chance to keep breathing through the hottest days. Section 5. Potted soils. The double pot method and grouping. If in-ground garden beds are like strong castles with deep foundations, then container plants, hanging baskets, and grow bags are the vulnerable travelers of the garden. They live by a different set of rules during a heat wave, and they need special protection. The reason is simple. Their roots are lifted above the ground. They do not have the natural temperature buffer that soil in the earth provides. In a garden bed, the deeper layers stay cooler and more stable. But in a pot, especially a dark plastic pot sitting on a hot patio, the growing medium can heat up very quickly. On concrete, stone, or balcony tiles, the root zone can climb to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, or even 140 degrees Fahrenheit. At that level, the fine root hairs that absorb water can be damaged within hours. To protect container plants, start with 3 important steps. First, move them. Any portable container should be taken out of direct south and west-facing sun before the strongest heat arrives. Place them where they receive deep, filtered shade, such as under a tree, beneath a patio cover, beside a north-facing wall, or in any spot that protects them from the harsh afternoon blast. Second, group them together. When pots stand alone, each one loses moisture quickly. But when you cluster them, the plants share a small humid microclimate created by their own transpiration. This helps reduce moisture loss and softens temperature swings around the leaves and containers. Third, lift them off hot surfaces. A pot sitting directly on concrete, asphalt, stone, or tile absorbs heat from below as well as from the sun above. Place containers on wooden pallets, pieces of turf, rubber mats, or anything that creates a barrier between the pot and the hot ground. This simple step reduces heat conduction into the root ball. One of my favorite emergency methods for potted plants is the double pot method. Take the growing container and place it inside a second, slightly larger empty container. The small layer of trapped air between the 2 pots works as insulation. It slows down the heat that would otherwise bake the root zone from the outside. If the container is dark, wrap it with light-colored fabric, burlap, or even an old white towel to reflect sunlight away. Container plants are small worlds with limited soil, limited moisture, and very little room for error. During severe heat, some may need watering twice a day. So before the heat wave settles in, make those small worlds cooler, shaded, grouped, lifted, and protected. Section 6. Lay down the shears. Stop pruning your plants. In June or July, it is common to walk through the garden and see tomatoes, squash, zucchini, or peppers covered in thick, lush foliage. Many gardeners look at that growth and think, maybe I should prune some leaves so the plant can breathe better, or so it can focus more energy on fruit. But right before or during an extreme heat wave, this is the moment to put the shears down. A dense leaf canopy is not a problem during severe heat. It is the plant's natural shade system. Those leaves are not only making food through photosynthesis, they are also protecting tender stems, interior branches, flowers, and developing fruits from direct, burning sunlight. In many cases, that foliage is the only thing standing between your crop and serious sun damage. If you prune heavily just before the heat arrives, you remove that protective umbrella. Fruits and stems that were once shaded are suddenly exposed to intense solar radiation. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, and other crops can develop sun scald quickly, leaving pale, leathery, sunken patches that never heal properly and often become entry points for rot. There is another reason to avoid pruning during heat stress. Every cut creates a wound. To close that wound, the plant must spend water, sugars, and energy that it should be using for survival, cooling, and basic maintenance. Pruning is not a neutral action. It is a stress, and during a heat wave, the plant is already carrying enough stress. This does not mean you should never prune. It means timing matters. Wait until the heat wave has fully passed. Then choose a cool, overcast morning, preferably when rain is not expected, so the cut areas can dry cleanly and reduce the risk of fungal infection. For now, let the garden keep its green shield. Let the leaves shade the fruit. Let the plants stay whole, wild, and protected under the canopy they have built for themselves. Section 7. Turfgrass Sanctuary. Lawn Care Restrictions. Our lawns often take the full force of summer heat before we even realize how much stress they are under. Cool season grasses, like Kentucky bluegrass, tall fescue, and ryegrass, can struggle badly when temperatures stay high for days. But when a heat wave arrives, the secret to protecting your lawn is not doing more. In many cases, it is knowing what to stop doing. First, raise your mower blades. Set the mower to the highest recommended height, usually around 3 to 4 inches, and during a severe heat wave, even taller grass can help. Taller blades cast more shade over the soil surface. That shade cools the root crowns, slows moisture loss, and gives the grass a better chance to hold on until conditions improve. Second, leave the clippings on the lawn. Do not bag them during hot weather. Short, light grass clippings settle between the blades and act like a thin, natural mulch. They help shade the soil, reduce evaporation, and return a little organic matter back to the lawn as they break down. Third, stop all aggressive lawn work until the heat has passed. Do not dethatch, scarify, or aerate during a heat wave. These jobs may be useful in the right season, but under extreme heat, they become too harsh. They tear at roots, open the soil, and expose the root zone to hot, dry air. Core aeration, in particular, creates holes that can allow heat to move deeper into the soil, drying the lawn from below when it is already struggling. Finally, reduce foot traffic as much as possible. Heat-stressed grass loses its firmness and flexibility. When you step on it, the cells cannot spring back the way they normally would. Repeated walking can crush the tissues, leaving brown footprints or worn patches that may take a long time to recover. Let the lawn rest. If it turns brown and goes dormant, do not panic. Dormancy is not always death. Many grass crowns and roots can survive several weeks in that resting state if they are not pushed, cut too short, or trampled. Sometimes the wisest care is simply to let nature pause. Section 8. Weed Eradication. Remove the silent water thieves. Weeds are some of the toughest survivors in the garden. They are opportunists, and many of them are better adapted to heat and drought than the vegetables we work so hard to grow. While tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, and young seedlings are struggling to manage rising temperatures, Weeds often keep growing as if nothing is wrong. During a heat wave, weeds become more than an eyesore. They act like silent water pumps. Their roots pull moisture from the soil profile, taking away the reserves your crops need most. In normal weather, a few small weeds may not seem urgent, but before extreme heat, every weed becomes competition. That is why we remove them before the heat wave arrives. But the method matters. Do not deeply till the soil, and do not yank weeds in a way that flips over large clods of earth. Deep disturbance exposes cool, moist soil to hot air and sunlight, causing faster evaporation. It can also damage the fungal networks and soil structure that help hold moisture and support healthy roots. Instead, use a hoop hoe, scuffle hoe, or hand weeder to slice weeds cleanly at the soil line. This cuts the plant down without turning the soil over. It removes the competition while keeping the topsoil protected and the deeper moisture where it belongs. Do this work early in the morning, when the air is cooler and both you and the garden are under less stress. After the weeds are sliced, cover the exposed soil with a thick layer of organic mulch. That mulch helps suppress new weed growth and locks in the moisture you just protected. Every garden has water thieves. Some are obvious, some are quiet, and some only become dangerous when conditions get hard. Before the heat arrives, remove what is draining your soil so your crops have enough strength to endure. Section 9. Preemptive harvest and the blossom pollination trick. A heat wave calls for smart timing in the vegetable garden. This is not the moment to wait and hope everything holds on. Before the hottest days arrive, you need to harvest what is ready and help certain crops finish pollination while conditions are still favorable. Start with cool season crops such as lettuce, spinach, arugula, and radishes. If they are mature or even nearly mature, harvest them before the heat wave begins. High temperatures and strong sun can push these plants to bolt very quickly. Once they bolt, they send up a central flower stalk, leaf production slows or stops, and the flavor often turns bitter. At that point, the harvest you were waiting for can lose its quality almost overnight. Now, what about warm season crops like tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants? Many gardeners assume these plants love heat, and they do, but only within limits. When daytime temperatures rise above about 92 degrees Fahrenheit or nighttime temperatures stay above 70 degrees Fahrenheit, pollination can begin to fail. The pollen may become sticky, dry, or sterile. When that happens, flowers do not set fruit. Instead, they yellow, dry up, and drop from the plant. This is what gardeners often call blossom drop. To protect your harvest before the temperature spike damages the pollen, you can step in and help with pollination. In the days leading up to the heat wave, walk through the garden in mid-morning and gently shake or vibrate the open flower clusters. Tomatoes are self-pollinating, and that light movement helps release pollen inside the blossoms. Peppers and eggplants can also benefit from gentle flower movement when natural pollinator activity is low or heat is coming fast. The goal is to help fruit set before the extreme heat arrives. Once fruit has set, it is usually much more stable, even if later flowers drop during the hottest days. Sometimes gardening is about timing the final push before the window closes. A small shake today can mean a full harvest tomorrow. Section 10. The aftermath. Soil and plant rehabilitation. When the heat dome finally moves on, the air feels cooler, the garden looks calmer, and for the first time in days, you may feel like you can breathe again. But as any experienced grower will tell you, the recovery is not finished just because the temperature has dropped. Much of the real damage may still be hidden beneath the soil surface. A long heat wave can weaken soil structure in a serious way. When surface temperatures climb above 122 degrees Fahrenheit, organic matter can break down much faster than normal, reducing the carbon reserves that help hold soil particles together. Beneficial fungi and microbes may decline, and the top layer of soil can collapse into a hard, compacted crust. In many gardens, that crust becomes hydrophobic, meaning it actually repels water instead of absorbing it. If you try to water deeply at that point, much of the water may simply run across the surface and drain away, while the deeper root zone remains dry. That is why the garden needs a careful post-heat wave recovery process. First, start with pre-moistening. Dry, crusted, water-repelling soil cannot handle a heavy soaking all at once. Use a slow, gentle mist or light drip irrigation over time, ideally 24 to 48 hours before doing any soil work. This helps soften the hardened surface and prepares the soil to receive water again. Second, Gently break the crust. Use a broad fork, garden fork, or hand cultivator to loosen only the top 2 to 4 inches. Do not till deeply. The goal is not to turn the whole bed upside down. We only want to open small pathways so water, air, and oxygen can move back toward the root zone. Third, add compost. Spread a 2 to 3 inch layer of high-quality finished compost over the soil and gently work it into the upper layer. Compost brings back structure, moisture-holding capacity, and organic life. Its humus compounds help soil hold water more effectively, and it also reintroduces beneficial microbes that support the soil food web. Finally, water the compost-amended bed deeply and slowly. This helps activate the microbial life, supports surviving mycorrhizal fungi and beneficial bacteria, and begins the process of restoring balance to the earth. After a heat wave, do not rush the garden back into production. Help the soil breathe again. Help it absorb water again. When the soil begins to recover, the plants above it have a real chance to recover too. We grow with the soil. Every experienced gardener eventually learns something that beginners often find hard to accept. Gardening is not a straight line of endless success. It is not always lush growth, perfect leaves, heavy harvests, and easy victories. Gardening is a relationship built through patience, observation, care, mistakes, stress, and recovery. A garden moves in cycles. There are times when everything grows quickly and seems unstoppable. There are times when baskets fill with tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and squash. Then there are times when the sun becomes too strong, the soil cracks, the leaves droop, and every plant seems to be asking for help. And after that, if we care for the garden wisely, there is often a quiet recovery that feels almost miraculous. A heat wave is not the end of the story. It is one difficult chapter in the life of your garden. When the heat comes, plants do not panic. They close their stomata. They slow their growth. They conserve water, energy, and internal resources. They do what living things have done for millions of years. They endure, they wait, and they trust that cooler days will return. And maybe that is one of the deepest lessons the garden gives us. The next time extreme heat threatens your beds, containers, or lawn, do not rush into fear. Water deeply at the roots. Protect the soil with mulch. Give the plants shade and airflow. Stop feeding. Stop pruning. Stop adding unnecessary stress. Then step back and let the garden use the resilience already built into it. Because when we protect the soil through the harshest summer days, we are not only saving tomatoes, peppers, squash, lettuce, or herbs. We are practicing patience. We are learning restraint. We are building our own resilience right alongside the plants we care for. We do not just grow a garden. In many quiet ways, the garden grows us. Thank you for spending this time with me, here at Earthly Delights. If you want to keep learning the secrets of healthy soil, smarter planting, and sustainable gardening, consider subscribing and joining this warm, growing community. Let me know in the comments what temperatures you are facing where you live, and how your garden is coping right now. Until next time, stay shaded, stay smart, and happy gardening.